Hey guys, this is Toby Mathis, and today we're going to talk about LLCs and specifically how they're used in real estate. In fact, I'm just going to call it the ultimate guide to using LLCs in real estate. Are you interested in learning about LLCs and how they can benefit your real estate business? Because in this video, I'm going to talk to you about LLCs and why they're such an important part of any successful real estate investing business. I'll also show you how to form your own LLC in just a few steps. So sit back, relax, and let me teach you everything you need to know about LLCs. So first off, I'm just going to assume that you guys are new or haven't heard of LLCs, or maybe you're a seasoned investor and you'd just like a refresher. But let's just start off at its base level. So what is an LLC? It stands for Limited Liability Company. If I hear anybody say Limited Liability Corporation, I'm probably going to make fun of you. But an LLC is just a fancy way of saying a box that we put around our business. Why does anybody want to put a box around their business? Because there's things that could occur inside that business. You know, anything from lawsuits, breach of contract, employee claims, all sorts of stuff. Just in real estate, it could just be tenant disputes. It could be injuries that occur on properties, whatever. It could be anything from environmental, you name it. Any liabilities that come from that real estate, and we want to put them in the box, close it up, so that we can isolate ourselves from the liability. It's something that gets started with the state. And let's just talk about it. We got 50 states. There's 50 flavors of LLCs. And you get to pick whichever one you want, right? There's certain things that you're going to have to do. Like, for example, if I am doing real estate, I am physically in a state, I'm going to have to address something in that state. But that does not mean that I can't set up a entity, which an LLC is, in another state. So for example, I could set up a Wyoming LLC and register it to do business in any state where I'm doing business, or any state where I have real estate. Or if you're more on the asset protection mind, you might say, I'm fine having an entity, let's say a Texas LLC, but I know that people might be able to get to my entity. Maybe I'm in California, maybe I'm in a litigious state, maybe I'm in Florida or Colorado or something where I'm like, I know that somebody could get through that entity and possibly get to me, or that they might be able to take my box away. Like, let's say I put a business in my box. What if somebody tries to take it from me? So there are states that can make it really, really difficult to do that. In fact, the most often used jurisdiction right now is Wyoming, with Nevada and Delaware coming up just behind it. But by and large, if you're doing real estate investing, and you're working with a good asset protection firm, they're probably bringing up Wyoming. But let's get ahead of ourselves. That LLC is just a creature of statute. In other words, you're paying the state for the benefits of those statutes. And we'll talk about this in a little bit when we talk about how to form it. But in its core, you're saying, I want the benefits of your statute that creates a box that can hold my assets. And that's really what I'm looking for. And so you do this by forming it with the state, by paying that state a formation fee. Generally, you're doing something called a certificate of formation with the state and saying, I want the protections offered by your statute. What are those protections? Hey, if something happens inside the box, it stays in the box and doesn't come out and get me. So I'm going to use an example of, let's see, this is ethanol, right? You light it and it keeps things warm. I'm going to use this just as an example. Let's say this is a piece of property, and I have that property in my hand, and I say I light it up, right? Some liability is going on, and it's in my hand. Guess what's going to happen to my hand? It's going to get burned. So what if I take that, and instead I take it and I put it in this box? So I just took this thing that was going to burn my hand, put it in the box, close it up in the box. Now if something happens, it's in the box. It's not going to burn my hand. In fact, I could put it down. I can even put it in another box to create even another layer of protection. And now I'm twice removed from the liability. Can you do that? Yes. And so all I'm doing is creating a scenario where if something happens, it's isolated from me. Now here's what happens. People go and say, that's great because I have a whole bunch of properties. So I have all these properties, right? Here's the problem. Let's say that we take these properties and we stick them in our box. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to open it up. We already have one property in there, remember? So we have one property already in there. Now we put 3 more. What's the problem with that scenario? Something bad happens with that. Everything's in the box. Something happens to one of them, it happens to all of them. And so most practitioners are going to say, let's isolate each liability in its own box. Now, I'm not going to say this is for everybody. There's situations, maybe you have 20 properties and you're like, hey, I'm okay losing 5 of them. And maybe you're putting each one in your grouping properties into separate LLCs. But for most of us, especially when we're just getting started out, the reasonable step is to set up an LLC, put the property into it. Sometimes you're using a land trust, which I'll point you to my partner Clint Coons' YouTube channel. He does a really good job of explaining that, or I have also videos on mine that'll go through it. But you're putting something inside of a land trust and you're assigning that over to your LLC. Now, here's the exact process that you go through to set up an LLC. You're going to file it with the state, usually a certificate of formation. If you want privacy, I'm going to stop you right now. If you want to make sure that your name does not appear in the Secretary of State, you're going to have to use a group like ours, because you're going to want to make sure that you have anonymity. And the incorporator is going to be a public record. You're going to be a public record if you list yourself as a member or as a manager. And there's ways to block this out. I'm not going to get into it, but you could actually have somebody else assist you with this and keep your name completely out of the records. And if you're in a state where you say they always have to list somebody, an LLC has to have its members or its managers, you could literally set up an LLC in a state that does not require it, like Wyoming, and have it own, let's say, a state where there's disclosure like Florida, and you could have it be the member. Then you have a member managed LLC and the disclosures of the Wyoming entity, which does not have your name. So I'm not going to get too deep in that. Just know that you can complete your anonymity. You can have complete anonymity with this type of structure. So you file it with your state. That's all you're doing, certificate of formation, and then you have to give it a body. And that's your operating agreement. But these things are not difficult. The operating agreement just says whether you're member managed, manager managed, and what are the rights, how voting takes place, what happens if somebody passes away disabled, how disputes are resolved, who gets to make decisions, and the relative rights between the members and whatever management structure you put in place. Once you set it up with that state, though, you're in existence. Then you go to the federal government and you say, here's how it's going to be taxed. And you have a huge amount of choices. You could make it disregarded, partnership, S Corp, C Corp. Like you could have an LLC taxed as a C Corp, right? And then you have to keep a record of it. When I say record, they call it books and records. And it doesn't matter whether you're a sole proprietor, partnership, LLC, S Corp, C Corp, nonprofit. Does not matter what you're doing. The record keeping is the same as far as the IRS is concerned. From a state standpoint, they really just want you to notify them every year, hey, has anything changed? All you're doing is keeping a written record of what's gone on with that LLC, because the rule of thumb is if you respect your LLC, the courts will respect your LLC. You disrespect your LLC, the courts will disrespect it and ignore it. So you want to make sure that you're keeping compliance. And that leads us really back to that to the point of, hey, we're getting a tax identification number, an EIN. Then there are implications from a tax standpoint as to how you set it up, as to how it's going to be taxed to you. So for example, I could set up an LLC, I could put a piece of real estate in it, and I could say to the feds, ignore that LLC. States are going to do the same thing, which means the LLC does not exist for tax purposes. Everything is on my return just like I owned it individually, except now I've placed a nice box around my assets so that they can't burn me. And vice versa, I can also create a nice scenario where it's much harder to take that box out of my hands so that somebody cannot take my net worth and my wealth away from me. All right, so we hit some pretty 10,000-foot view level items. We talked about setting up the LLC, what the benefits of that LLC, why you're using it in real estate, that it's separate for tax purposes if you want it to be. And then it really comes down to recognizing the benefits of the LLC and deciding how to use it in your real estate investing. But it absolutely is one of the best tools for real estate investors to mitigate their risk, minimize their exposure, and protect their wealth.